Hey everybody. No, you thought I was going to start with playing and not talking? I just wanted to play a little prelude just to get us started, little mini teaser before we get into everything. And also checking volume levels because I know the cello is going to be louder than my voice. So I always kind of try to test out both in case one of them is too quiet or too loud. You guys can let me know. But I'm doing the best I can with one microphone for both my voice and the cello. So thank you all who are here right on time. I like to kind of ease into the streams just to let people arrive. But I know I actually did kind of announce this one, so people actually knew to come on time, which is great. And if you're watching the archive after, you can feel free to skip ahead a couple minutes once we really get going into all this stuff. And I have a computer set up here to see the chat, because I noticed when I was using my phone to keep a track of the chat last time, I think some of the messages actually don't come up on the YouTube app. It doesn't show every single message in the chat, so I have a computer here and hopefully there's no lag. I mean, you guys are of course hearing me like a minute or so delayed, so if it takes me a second to get to your question in the chat, that's why. But hello, welcome, happy Bach's birthday. So I'm going to be playing some Bach, talking about ornamentation, and I just wanted to start with some talk about Bach in general, because he is such an important person in classical music. He did so much for all music that came after him, though some people may know he was not really celebrated in his lifetime. He pretty much made his living as a church musician, writing music for the church. That's why we have so many amazing cantatas by Bach, because he was writing them for work. But it wasn't until, I didn't do any homework for this, guys, by the way. I was like, oh, I'm going to talk about this, and then I was like, I should probably check on some of those names and dates before I do this, and now here I am. I did not check on any of those names and dates. So, all the historians in the chat can feel free to either augment what I'm saying or correct me if I'm saying anything false. Bach was really not popular in his time. I think I even heard he was like, I think they had, in the 18th century, they had like this graveyard situation where they sometimes would like throw multiple people in a grave. And I think I remember hearing like Bach had I think he has an actual tombstone somewhere in Germany, but I don't know if he's actually buried there. I want all the Bach scholars out of the woodwork because we need your information. Hi everybody, welcome. I am checking in on the chat. Bach died not famous and not really renowned in any way, and it was, who was that great, I think he was a Russian conductor. Someone's going to know this information, whether it's someone watching this or someone watching it live. The Russian conductor that in the early 20th century, I believe, basically, was it... Man, this is why I was going to check the facts. But the point is, by the 20th century, or maybe it was late 19th century, we had sort of a Bach revival by Russian orchestras that were rearranging some of Bach's work for these larger orchestral arrangements. And then Bach sort of came into the classical mainstream, and then we went on to discover his works. Like, for example, the Bach cello suites were really not known very well until Pablo Casals performed them in what I believe was like the 1920s. So Bach, even though he's basically has this like almost religious following now in the classical community, he really didn't live his life that way, which is sad to think about. But the best thing that we can do to thank him for all that he did for music and for us is play his music now and help it live on, which is what today's stream is kind of about. Okay, additions for the suite. So I'm definitely going to talk about the addition that I'm using once we get past this intro, because pretty much every time I play Bach on a stream, I do talk about additions because it's such an important part of playing anything by Bach, but especially the cello suites. So Bach didn't have a very glamorous life. A lot of us know that he had multiple wives and many children, and a number of his children were composers as well, and we have a lot of great work from his sons who were doing other kinds of music work. So we have C.P.E. Bach, J.C. Bach, there's a couple others that we have surviving works from. They're, of course, not as esteemed as Bach's works, but still a great contribution to the repertoire. But some people may know this and may not. Bach is really known for the Baroque style as we think of it, and tonal harmony as we think of it. Bach was really outlining the structures for all of these things and really securing them with all the repertoire that he was putting out. But his sons were actually writing more transitional out of the Baroque period into the more early classical kind of time. So his son's music is not super similar. Bach was still, till the day he died, writing in the old style. Even though his sons were progressing and using the knowledge that they gave him to write newer styles, Bach was really in his style till he died. So we don't see, some composers, we look at early Beethoven compared to late Beethoven, and we see this dramatic change over the course of his life. I think with Bach, he's a little more consistent, but that's not necessarily a bad thing at all because so much of his work is so great. C.P. Bach especially really did write a lot of amazing repertoire, including some really awesome cello concertos, also lots of chamber music and other stuff. So it's too bad that Bach was not remembered during his time, but he's of course really remembered now. And I did want to say a little note about his birthday. We do all typically think of Bach's birthday as this day, the 21st, but if you do a little research, some people seem to think he was born on the 31st of March, and I didn't do enough digging because, like I said, I was going to do all this homework, and then I just started this stream, and I'm just talking off the top of my head. But so Bach was potentially actually born on the 31st of March and not the 21st. We don't know for sure. Again, I should have had a Bach scholar with me today for this to be fact-checking everything I'm saying or bringing out all the documents, but that's part of the fun. You can do your own historical digging on Bach. There's plenty of stuff to find and read about him. So, anything else I was going to say? He was not very famous in his lifetime, extremely prolific, mostly, Bach, he was Protestant, if I'm correct on that, and he was religion, God was everything to Bach. I mean, yes, he had a church job, so he was writing for the church regularly, but even in some of his quotes that we see from him, he was really seemed to be a sort of stoic, hard-ass man, but his faith was really important to him, and everything that he did in his music was sort of about honoring God. So whether you feel that way when you play his music or not, I think that there is something a little bit bigger than him when we play Bach. I think we can all feel that. And I think I've heard a lot of people, classical musicians especially, say this, that something about Bach is kind of music that keeps on giving. As you get older and mature, your understanding and appreciation of Bach typically does the same. I know very few people who, liked Bach when they were younger and then got over it. Most people, if anything, maybe don't find it the most accessible when they start playing Bach as a young musician, but as they get older and they study more and they mature more as a human, they find even more depths in Bach. It really is the music that keeps on giving. He was so incredibly brilliant, and he was not afraid to go deep with his music, and his brilliance is really apparent. I mean, it's a different kind of brilliance than Mozart, who we talk about all the time as being a prodigy. Mozart had a lot of sort of spontaneous, fun, creative energy. Bach, I would say, is a lot more like learned, studied, theoretical, because he was so harmonically based, and we learned so much about harmony from his chorales and stuff like that. But what I think that adds to Bach's music is this incredible depth where you can look at one layer and it makes great sense, but then you can go a layer deeper and a layer deeper, and you can analyze and you can pick it apart into so many different things, and there's always substance there. You know, nothing with Bach felt like an afterthought. It was like everything was really, really intentional. Hi everybody, checking in on the chat. Thank you guys all for being here. So, anything else on Bach before we talk a little more about music? So this is going to be pretty casual. You know, a lot of people have been saying to me they're missing my cello streams where I'm playing and stuff, so I wanted to do that for today's stream and play a little bit more. I have not been like crazy practicing the way I used to, so it'll be a little more on the rough side. That's my disclaimer, but I'm still here to play for you guys and talk about the music through playing it. So for the Bach cello suites that we're going to be doing today, I use the Baron Reiter edition, which if you guys saw on my Instagram or my Facebook, I did post this. And this particular one, they make like a $25 one that has decent bowings in there, and then they make this set that comes with a number of manuscripts, which I'll talk about, as well as a modern print copy that has no slurs written in at all, so that you're able to look at the different manuscript sources and decide which bowings you want to do and write them in. So that is what I use, either this modern print with no bowings, so I can actually write in all of my own bowings, or what comes with the larger set, this manuscript copy, which I've shown before. It's very sloppy. It's notoriously sloppy, and notoriously inconsistent in terms of bowings, unfortunately. So this manuscript that I'm using is from Anna Magdalena, who is one of Bach's wives. I think she was the only one at the time, but he did have multiple throughout his life. And she worked as his copyist along with either his sons or other people. He had a number of copyists. So this Anna Magdalena copy is considered the closest source that we have to Bach himself, because we do not have a surviving manuscript of the Bach cello suites in Bach's actual hand, which makes for a huge debate about bowings and sometimes even notes, because none of the various manuscript copies that we do have from the copyists are completely matching another one. So it becomes a big scholarly debate around who do you follow, you know, which part do you obey. And then, of course, all these copyists and Bach himself, they're all human beings who are prone to making errors, inconsistencies, especially when you're writing out pages and pages of stuff that looks like this. You could easily make a mistake, and they didn't have erasers. This was like quill pens or whatever, so there's a mistake. That mistake is just on there. So you're always dealing with a mixed bag when you use a manuscript, but you're also a lot closer to where things really began, because when you use an edited copy, you're just following whatever the editor says, and so you don't really know what led the editor to make those decisions or which manuscripts they're drawing from. And if you have a great editor, that's fine, but it's nice for Bach to go a little deeper sometimes and look at these more manuscript copies and just sort of see what they were working with. I do really like Baron Reiter though, because the edition that they make that does have bowings printed in it are very good bowings that are basically based off this original source, and then some inconsistencies are addressed. So overall, I just recommend Baron Reiter for Bach always. And I have performed using this manuscript copy, because I would not learn a Bach suite from this copy, but once you know a Bach suite, you can use this if you're used to reading off of handwritten copies. So that answers that on editions. And then let's talk just a little bit about ornamentation in general. And there's actually kind of a rumor that you're not supposed to ornament in Bach. That Bach, you know, he wrote his own ornamentation, which to an extent is true. If you're looking for a more sort of thorough overview explanation of ornamentation, I do have a video on my channel in the instructional videos playlist that is called Baroque Ornamentation or something like that. And I do more of just kind of like an overview about ornamenting in the Baroque style. But basically the takeaway is there are a couple different styles of ornamentation and different ways that composers approached it. So the Italians, for example, would write very simple melodic parts expecting that the performer would ornament. And so, for example, when you play Vivaldi, you're really not supposed to just play every printed note exactly as it's written. Vivaldi didn't intend that when he wrote it. The Italians were very used to improvising on the spot all the time. And some of our best ornamentation treatises, like Corelli, for example, from the 17th century, come from the Italian tradition. So Italians generally wrote what's called a skeleton melody, a very simple line, expecting ornamentation to be done. The French, for example, they were a little bit more deliberate. So they would write out a lot of ornaments, and they had a whole system of trill symbols that would be indicating different types of trills and turns that you would do on notes. Didn't mean that you wouldn't also improvise ornamentation, but the French were a little more deliberate. So then going to Bach, who's German, he was kind of fusing all different influences. Some of his music is Italian, some has French influence, but again, his music is pretty in-depth. So yes, he does fill things in himself very often, some of which could be considered written out ornamentation. And the way that you know something is written out ornamentation, I'm about to get a knock on my door. No? Okay. The way that you know something is written out ornamentation is basically by looking at the chord, taking out whether it's 16th note, 32nd notes, taking out the smaller note values, looking at the larger note values and seeing, okay, this melody came earlier in this piece, but now there's some 16th notes in here, or now there's some more leaps or something like that. And so that's how you know, okay, so this is just an ornament written out on top of this melody that came before. So we do see a lot of that in Bach. And yes, he writes a lot of notes and his music is dense, so there's not a ton of room to be adding ornaments all the time. But I find, particularly in the Bach cello suites, so many people have performed them, we've heard them so many times, that I think it's really important to add some sort of individuality to your performance. You don't have to go crazy with it, but I personally always wanted to kind of put my own little signature on Bach. And yes, you can do that with phrasing and all sorts of other things, but ornaments are a nice way to do that too. But it's finding the right spots, the appropriate spots, and doing it in a stylistic way. So I thought what I would do is pick a couple of movements from the first Bach suite where I do some ornamentation and just play little excerpts and talk about why I do those ornaments or what led me to deciding to do that. And hopefully it gives you guys some ideas of things you can do. I do want to say, if you're a professional and you're watching this, please don't steal my ornaments. That's just not a good look. If you're a student and you're watching this, you can steal my ornaments if you want, and I will consider it a learning experience. And you can say, I learned these from Emily Davidson on her YouTube channel. But if you're a professional, I would say, take these ideas and augment them, play around with them yourself. Copying someone's ornaments is never a good look, and I actually have had that happen to me, had someone copy my ornaments, and I was like, I don't do well with being copied, and I've been copied all my life. I'm a little bit salty about it in general, but I just want to say, I'm going to share my ornaments with you guys, but use your best taste and judgment whether you're going to take them on for your own Bach performances. And if you've heard any of my solo albums, you've heard these ornaments, or some of the videos on my channel too, I do these, and some of them I change up, like I've done some ornaments sometimes and not other times. That's the nice thing about ornamentation too, is you don't always have to do it, you can do it in certain circumstances, so we'll get into all that too. Yeah, in terms of gut strings and steel strings, so yeah, I'm going to be doing all of this on my Baroque cello. My modern cello is the one sitting back there, and this is my Baroque cello. So if you guys know me, you know all about this already, but in case you're new to this channel, so this instrument was actually built in 1950. It's not an actual Baroque instrument, but it has been partially converted to be more like the instruments were during the Baroque period. So a big one for that is I do not have an end pin on here. Just a little button down there, so you can't totally see in the shot, but I just cradle it with my legs. If you're familiar with the viola da gamba, it's a similar hold for the cello. I am playing on gut strings, so if I get a little closer, you can kind of see. So steel strings were not invented till around 1920. I think actually, because I was just talking about Pablo Casals, I think he actually was still playing on gut strings. So maybe it was like the 1930s when steel strings became normalized. So that means everything, romantic repertoire included, was all gut strings. So that was what they had at the time. They have a completely different timbre and sound. Sometimes they get squeaks and squawks. You know, some of those flaws of gut strings are what led instrument makers and so on to make steel strings, because they're more reliable, they stay more in tune, they don't squeak, they have an easier response. So yes, gut strings are more difficult to play on and harder to get as good of a sound, but they have their own timbre and quality. So gut strings, my tailpiece is very simple. You can see there's no fine tuners, and if I will tune before I play again. I use the big pegs just like a violin would. And my bow is a different shape than a modern bow. My modern bow is back there. And this Baroque bow I hold up further from the frog because it has a different balance point. And it has a lighter tip. So basically a Baroque bow just helps us get the more Baroque style articulations, because this is the kind of bow they were using. And the idea with this bow is that up bows and down bows are not created equal. We want a stronger down bow and a weaker up bow. And they liked imbalance during the Baroque period. They didn't want everything to be matched and sound the same, like we sort of learned to do in later repertoire, where we try to make sure our up bows are strong enough and make sure everything is legato and connected. That's not what they were doing in the Baroque period. The bows weren't even built to do that. So this bow gets us a little closer to getting that real Baroque articulation. And playing on an instrument like this, you can also see the fingerboard is shorter, because they were not playing all crazy up here thumb position all the time in these days. So this is a lot closer to the instrument that Bach was actually dealing with when he wrote these cello suites, more so than my modern cello back there. Okay, so I'll tune a little and then play a bit. Just joined, welcome. You missed the intro all about Bach, but this stream will be archived after it's over, so you can go watch the beginning again when it's done. I know you guys really wanted me to play cello, so here I am. I'm playing cello just because you guys all asked me so much, and like I said, I have not been practicing and playing a ton, so I'm not going to sound as amazing as I used to sound, but I'm going to do my best. And yeah, if you guys are enjoying the stream, please do give it a thumbs up down there. I see someone already gave me a thumbs down. I just wish the thumbs down people would say what their problem is in the chat so that I can address them, because I love a good debate. But anyway, so maybe we'll start. I'm trying to think which movement has some, they all have some good opportunities. So again, we're dealing with the first Bach suite here. I'm going to play a little bit of the sarabande, which is the fourth movement of the suite. And I'm going to play a little bit of it, and then I will stop to talk about how I approach ornamenting in this movement. And I did not ornament in there other than trills, which are most likely written in or intended. So right off the bat, a good sort of default for approaching ornamentation is that anything that has repeats in it, which almost all the Bach movements do, that you would repeat on the repeats are when you would do the ornaments, and you would play it normally first. And I think that's in general a good approach. What I was going to say something. Okay, so ornamenting in general. There are a lot of ways to ornament beyond just adding notes. We think of ornamentation as adding notes, but you can ornament by doing things that are a lot more subtle. You can actually ornament by taking notes out, believe it or not. Like in certain times where there's maybe like a rolled chord or there's a trill, you can experiment with actually taking that trill out or not doing the chord, so that on the repeat then you do the chord, and that becomes now an ornament or a variant on that. So don't be afraid to think even more basic when it comes to ornamentation. It doesn't have to mean playing 6 million notes that weren't written there. So like for example, and also, I don't know if you consider this ornamenting exactly, but I think it's in the same vein. Timing and playing around with timing can also feel like an ornament. So I like to sometimes stretch things a little bit more, do more rubatos on repeats, to give a feeling like I'm ornamenting it. I'm sort of changing up the phrasing. So let's see here. So we start out with these chords, classic sarabande. And then this part here is where I do my first ornament if I'm doing a repeat. So normally we have so there's the phrase, but because it's kind of slow, we have some room in there to add a little. So normally what I do on the repeat, so I just fill, instead of going straight from the G to the D, I fill in to the D, I'm just playing the scale notes below the D. And now here, there's the option for a chord. Some people do it, some people don't. When I did it the first time, I just played just a trill and stayed on the E. But I can actually play that as a chord by just adding the open C and open G. So I'll do that with all the ornaments. And I can decide if I want to still do the trill or if I just want to do the chord. Because remember, more trills does not necessarily mean more good. Sometimes taking the trill out helps, because consider that a trill, it's changing the first notes that we hear. So if you're on a dissonant note, for example, the trill is actually going to soften the dissonance because it's going to add the note that is not dissonant. If you're on a note that is a consonant note that creates no dissonance, so in this example, the note is an E in a C major chord, so that's not dissonant. So when we add the trill adds dissonance by adding the F. But if we were playing a note that was already dissonant, by adding the trill, which we'll probably get to another example that has that, the trill will actually make it less dissonant, if that makes sense. So keep in mind that the trill is not always adding a juice factor. It might actually be taking away. There's a good moment in the courant. It's a good example, so I'll just skip to the courant for a second to explain. There's a D sharp in the courant that is like a dissonant, exciting note. So skipping to the courant, the previous movement, let me find a good place to start to do that. So there's our D sharp, the dissonant note, and many people play a trill on this. Thinking like, oh, that adds to the D sharp, and like it does add something, but the D sharp is our juicy dissonant note. And remember, dissonance in Baroque music is super important. So by adding the trill, the E is actually taking away from the dissonance of the D sharp. So I actually like to, when I play the courant, I know I'm jumping around now, I like to not do that trill the first time and just land on that D sharp. And so on. So just a consideration that be selective about your trills. And know that if you take one out, it'll be that much more interesting when you add it in later. So back to the sarabande. So we had talked about filling in, adding a chord, so that's an example where the D is softening the dissonant note with the trill. And I'll say right away that cadences are always going to be a good opportunity to do an ornament. So I actually don't typically ornament this cadence, but if I wanted to, I could add a trill, something like that. Always be looking out, and a couple of the other places we're going to look at are definitely going to be cadence spots where we add the ornaments in. So one thing that I do add in this sarabande is a connecting run from the A section to the B section. No, it's the B section repeating back. So what do I do? Okay, I'm going to play the B section now of this sarabande, and I am going to do the repeat with my ornament that I do on the repeat, and then I'll talk about it. So this is the sarabande from the first Bach suite, B section. And so on. So I didn't do the best job on that. I'll do it one more time, just the run. So basically what I'm doing is I'm just, again, filling in scale notes. That's a good default. But you want to know what harmony you're in and what key. And if you're not sure, you can try a couple options like, is this in D major or G major here? Because if you're not totally sure of the chord. But I cadence on the G, then I go down to the F sharp to begin the run, because the chord that I'm going to land on when I do the repeat has an F sharp on the top, with a D and an A on the bottom. So down to the F sharp. So I'm just playing. I decided that the C sharp sounded good going into the D major because I wanted that leading tone. Yeah, the C natural does not sound right. Even though we're in G major, for that moment we're in more of a D major and we need the C sharp. And so on. So filling in the space between the end of a section and going into the next section is really common. We see continuo players do that all the time, and I mean keyboard continuo players. Like someone playing harpsichord, for example, on a repeat will likely play a little run to connect the sections. So my ornament at the end of the B section of the sarabande is doing the same thing. Just bringing us back to the beginning of the B section. So that's an option too. And then in sarabandes, it's really, there are usually so many chords, so I like to look for times where I could maybe reduce a chord or fill out a chord more is a good place to start. And hi everybody who's just joining. We did a little intro about Bach, so you can watch that after the stream is over if you're interested, and now we're just going through some Bach movements talking about my ornaments. So that's my main stuff for the sarabande. Playing around with chords, connecting phrases at the end, stuff like that. So let's go to this courant, because I was talking a little bit about that. And another great option for ornamentation, and this courant is a really good movement to talk about this, bowings. Changing your bowings is also ornamentation. So that can mean... Hi Ships Ahoy. I go live at least once a month, if not more. And if you guys don't know this, when you subscribe to my channel, there's a little bell next to the subscribe button. And if you click the bell, it'll actually notify you when I go live. But you can also follow me. Like I always announce going live on Instagram and Facebook. So if you follow me on any of those places, which are all at Emily Plays Cello, you'll also know when I go live, or just click the bell on YouTube. But yeah, the streams are always archived, so you can always watch them after too. So, bowings. So taking a passage that's slurred and deciding to do separate bows is ornamenting, or slurring something that was separate bows is ornamenting, especially if you do it differently on each repeat. So that is kind of my baseline approach for the courant. So I'm going to play, I probably won't play the whole A section, maybe I will. And talk about the bowings that I switch up to do ornaments in the courant. So this will be like the first time. So a lot of you probably know those bowings because those are the most common. And it's basically longer slurs. So a lot of these 16th note runs are all getting slurred. So what I like to do is break them up. So here is what I do on the repeats. So I still did the first slur, but then I start breaking up the slurs. Then I go back. I still do these. And then we come to a cadence where I love to do an ornament. So I do a French ornament there, but I just love it. So before we had a simple cadence, right? That's the cadence as written. So what I'm doing in between the last beat before the cadence, I'm just adding some, it's basically a glorified trill with a turn. I'm saying French because this trill style is a little more French. So it's a trill on the F sharp with some stepwise to end, and then sometimes I do a trill with a dissonance because we get this open G. I keep the F sharp there because I just think it's cool. And it is stylistic. I'm not doing anything totally random. All this stuff is within style rules. So is my cool little ornament. Please don't steal that one. It's one of my faves. But looking out for cadences like that is usually a good time to add something, even if it's just a little trill. In fact, I see now, because this Urtext edition, which is so great, has little annotations for different things that different manuscripts said. And I do see that source C, D, and E, which are some of the later sources, do suggest that trill. So it's not out of the realm of possibility to do that. The last recording of Yo-Yo Ma, I don't know which one you're talking about. I did have one of his Bach Cello Suite recordings growing up, though. But he's recorded the Bach Cello Suites more than once, Yo-Yo. Okay, so those are some of my ideas for the first part of the courant. Oh, and there's some more places where I undo the slurs, so I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Here, I'll do those separate on the second time. That was the first time, so second time. So it gives it a totally different sound and character, which in my mind makes it legitimately an ornament because it has a completely different feel than the other one did. So second half, it's all somewhat similar. I mentioned when I was doing the sarabande the D sharp moment where I like to not trill on purpose. But let's see. I think I apply, and this you're going to find this for all the Bach movements, if there are certain ornaments or approaches that you do in the A section, there will likely be spots to do the same stuff in the B section. So always look out for that. Because that's basically what I do in the second part of the courant, is just take out some of the longer slurs that I do the first time. So I'll play a little of the second half and then show you how I change it up. So this is first time. So all longer slurs like we were doing. So what do I do the second time? I actually still do these on the second time. I think I might do that separate. But yeah, I'm not separating them every single time. Just when I want a little bit more excitement. And I find in the first part that is the most effective for this movement. Anything else in here? Again, timing and articulation is ornamenting too, and I think that's a great way to start. Like, I have definitely parts in this movement where I play short the first time and legato the second time, so... do that a little more legato, and then second time... really short. So that's just another way that you can change it up. And don't forego these like more simple approaches to ornamentation, because usually less is more. And I really wish I remember who said this quote. It was definitely, it could have been, I think it was one of the Italian guys. So maybe it was Corelli, but it could have been someone else. So again, music historians, if you're in the chat. But the idea that it is better to play the simple melody, non-ornamented, as beautifully as possible than it is to hack your way through and play with ornaments. So always start from a place of great musicality and really knowing what your musical idea and your phrasing is before you bring ornaments into the picture, because ornaments are not going to make you musical just right off the bat. If you don't already have an idea about your phrasing and how you want to shape things, the ornaments are just going to be, what's the expression? Polishing a turd. So just start from musicality first, then add your ornaments. Let's see. I was only going to go for an hour, so we're already getting there. Let's see about another movement. Oh, there's definitely some in the minuets that I like to do some stuff with. I don't find there's a ton... I personally don't do a ton of ornamentation in the first minuet, but I had a lot of ideas for ornaments in the second minuet, so that's where I do most of them. So let's start with just the A section of the second minuet. Again, this is the first Bach Cello Suite. And I'll play it normal, like it's first time. My C is a little bit out. Okay. I play the E flats. I always play the E flats in this movement. And it's because, I've talked about this before, but I don't mind repeating myself. If you play an E flat, you get a passacaglia bass line, a very common ground bass pattern in the Baroque. So it's worth playing the E flat to get that implied harmony, in my opinion. So what did Yo-Yo Ma record in this album? His third and last of the cello suites. Don't tell me he did a third album of the cello suites. That's so excessive. But I guess if anybody could get away with it, it would be Yo-Yo Ma. So what I do for ornaments for this, when I do the repeat, I put a little ornament to start. So because the first part ends on the F sharp, and then it starts again on the B flat. So I do a little ornament that fills in between the F sharp and the B flat. So it's just G, A, B flat. So a little lead in, kind of similar to the idea of the sarabande ornament that I did. I do this normal. But here, I add a trill. And you can add some sort of trill or a appoggiatura or whatever you want to call it before landing on the F sharp there too. So that's what I add there, and then I have some other ideas for the second half, but I don't totally remember them, so I'm going to start playing it and then I'm sure I will remember them. So now we're into the B section. So that's our first cadence. So yeah, I do a couple, I actually just add some trills that are in little cadence spots. And then I do vary my bowings in almost every repeat. But that's not as super critical in this movement, but I'll show you where I add some trills in just to add a little interest to this section. So just one's going to cadences basically. Then in the second part, it's the same idea. I do a couple little fill-ins and some extra trills. I'll play normally first, now going on from where I just played. So that's normal, and now I'll do some of my fill-ins. So a trill there, and I think I used to do something more elaborate. Yeah, and these are actually, again, sources C, D, and E suggest something similar to what I'm doing. I'm filling in a little bit more, but that actually is what they suggest. So it's just adding an extra D to delay the E flat. Then I added 16ths here. And then same thing, delaying that D. And I just do this normal. And then just a trill there. But you'll be surprised that just a couple small intentional additions to what you're normally doing really add a lot and add that little element of surprise and interest that ornaments exist for, right? Ornaments are just kind of there to keep us stimulated and interested in what's going on so that it doesn't get mundane. So it doesn't have to be really over the top. It can be these subtle little sparkles. Remember what an ornament is. It decorates something, but there is something already there. There's no point of a Christmas tree ornament without the Christmas tree. So just remember that the Bach cello suites are the Christmas tree, and that needs to be a beautiful tree. No matter how many ornaments you put on an ugly dying tree, it's still going to be ugly. So make sure your tree is beautiful, and then start adding your ornaments, and you'll have much better results. Let's see, is there anything else? I do a couple things in the allemande, maybe. So the prelude, which I started with, kind of bumpy. I do not do very many ornaments in the prelude, and I would not really advise ornaments in preludes too often. I mean, some of the preludes are a little bit more expansive, some of the later suites, but preludes in general are meant to be improvisatory sounding, so they kind of already have an ornamentation element built in more so than the dance movements. So I don't think you have to go crazy on a prelude. In fact, if there's not a really welcome opportunity for an ornament in a prelude, I would not bother at all. And remember that phrasing or bow variations count as ornaments too, in my book at least. So I'm not going to do much with the prelude because I'm not really ornamenting. The allemande, trying to remember where I did. There's a couple opportunities for trills that I like to add, but nothing too crazy sophisticated because the allemandes are also fairly dense movements in terms of just like a lot of flowing notes, whereas the ones that are a little more quick dancey, I think have more opportunities for ornaments personally. Yeah, wow, I guess Yo-Yo is doing another Bach movement. I would just be very curious to, I guess he's got something else to say, but it definitely proves my point that Bach is really the composer that keeps on giving. You know, as we mature, our understanding of Bach matures. So I think Yo-Yo is making a great example of that, making all these different recordings. And I know one of his recordings of the cello suites, I don't think it was Baroque cello, it was definitely still steel strings, but he did tune down to 415 like I'm tuned to, which is a half step lower than normal A. And he might have even played with a Baroque bow, I'm not entirely sure. But I remember because when I was like young and just, I was a teenager and just starting to take cello lessons, I used to play along with recordings a lot because I just wanted to. And I was learning a cello suite by Bach, and I decided that I would play along to a recording, which in hindsight is the weirdest thing ever, to play unaccompanied repertoire along with the recording. I honestly don't recommend that. But I was doing it for whatever reason, and I was playing modern cello in those days. I pointed the wrong way, modern cello. And I remember playing and being like, this isn't in the same, like, this sounds wrong. And I was playing along with the Yo-Yo Ma album, and then many years later realized, oh, he was tuned down to 415 and I was playing at regular A, and I was like, what's going on here? I thought we were playing the same piece, but that was what had happened there. Okay, so we'll look at a couple spots in the allemande, and then I think we will wrap up here. So if you guys have any, I did have questions from Instagram that I was going to answer, so I'll do those after we take a quick look at the allemande. But if you have any lingering questions, definitely throw them in the chat now. So I'll just play a little and I'll talk when I get to a spot with an ornament option. I love that trill, and I always do it. It is an ornament. I can see here that sources C and D recommended. But I love a first finger trill on an open string. I just think it's so fun, and I love the sound of that. And we have such a build up to that moment that landing on just the G feels a little anticlimactic. It's just a little more interesting. So I always do that one. But I try not to. Be very careful about doing the same ornament over and over, like if there's parallel spots that are similar. So if we continue, that's not the same. But this is. I do not do. That would be doing the same ornament there, and I do not do that because it gets redundant. You have to be really careful of that. So if I do it on the G major cadence, then when I get to the E minor cadence, I'm not going to do it. And just let that note sit on its own. So keep that stuff in mind, or else you could start to sound like kind of distasteful with your ornaments. And remember, doing ornaments is all about being really tasteful. So don't, the vibrato saying putting vibrato on every note is like putting ketchup all over your food. It's the same thing with ornaments. So be tasteful about it, be thoughtful, be looking for those parallel spots, and make sure ornaments should be adding interest, not adding distractions, if that makes sense. So trills are really the main one for this movement, little cadence trills like that. I'm trying to think if I do anything in the ending arpeggio. Yeah, I sometimes add a trill there, so. Just little ideas like that. Anything else? A lot of the stuff that I vary in this movement is, again, the sort of non-ornamentation ornamentation, so differences in phrasing, difference in timing, articulation, especially for Bach. Factor that stuff in. You're going to be doing repeats most likely in every single movement, so don't play the phrases the same every single time. And whether it's just taking a phrase and making the articulation a little shorter than you did it the first time, or a little longer than you did it the first time, that automatically just adds so much interest, and I really do consider that ornamenting also. What kind of microphones do you use when recording on GarageBand and for your live streams? Oh, I'm glad the sound quality is good. It's not anything fancy. I'm going to pick it up, but it's so you guys are going to hear me pick it up. So this Zoom recorder is what I've used for... Oh, let me get this. I've used this... I'm so bad right now. Okay, there we go. Zoom H4N, I guess is what it is. It's old. I've had it a couple years now. They have newer models, but this model that I use is fine. And it's a stereo recorder, so it picks up sound from the whole room, which I find is pretty good for cello because we just get more like acoustic sound. And it's really practical because you can use it at a concert or something and get a whole ensemble. And it has what's called an interface built in. So like normally if you were to buy just a microphone, the microphone needs to go into something to store the audio, right? Like the microphone doesn't have a storage card in it. It just picks up sound. But this device, the Zoom recorders, have an interface in there so that you put in an SD card like you would have on a digital camera, and it also saves the audio in addition to recording it. So you don't have to have a computer or anything plugged in. So it's really just very handy and very convenient. I've had it forever, and the sound quality is really good too. And I believe that I have an Amazon link in the description of this video. Yes. You can see my favorite cello-related things if you go to the description of the video, and there's a link to that on Amazon, that exact one that I have, so you can check it out there. But I do recommend it. It's a little pricey, maybe $200, $250, but I've had this thing forever, and I intend to keep using it. It's definitely worth the investment. So yeah, so that's going to be it for playing. I'm going to check on the Instagram questions, and then we will wrap up. So thank you guys for being in here and being so supportive. I really appreciate you guys, especially being patient. As many of you know, I'm really not playing as much as I used to and not practicing as much, so I do appreciate that you guys are not mad at me for that. All right. And yeah, so I do these live streams, like I said, some kind of live stream. Sometimes it's just a Q&A, sometimes it is playing at least once a month, so be sure to subscribe. And then I do upload videos. I'm featuring a lot more people now since I'm not playing as much anymore. And if you play early music or classical music, but I especially like, Baroque music, Renaissance, even medieval, the earlier stuff is great for my channel, but any kind of classical music on a classical instrument, you can apply to be on my channel because I'm really trying to feature more people, get some people exposure, like especially if you're growing your own YouTube channel or social accounts or something like that. I definitely recommend applying to be on my channel. That's on my website, emilyplayscello.com/collaborators, or if you just go to emilyplayscello.com, you'll see it up there. So I definitely welcome more people. Sorry, I keep messing with this hair piece. So yeah, if you play classical music, definitely check it out, because I would love to just have more people on my channel. And then yeah, live streams I'm still doing and that kind of stuff. And if you're missing my music or you want more of my music, I did put out an album in September with my friend Laura called Old Friends, which is Baroque cello and violin. And Laura's violin playing is so amazing. Like, she's my favorite violinist in the world. So recording with her was just the best. And we recorded 3 sonatas with me playing continuo on the cello and then her obviously playing the violin solo by Corelli, Handel, and Vivaldi. So that's on Spotify, iTunes, everywhere. It's also on my YouTube channel. You can listen to the whole album called Old Friends. So I still put some stuff out for you guys, even though I'm not playing and recording videos as much. There's definitely great musical content to dig into. And that album, we worked really hard on it. It's a real studio album. It's not like one take or anything. We really, I spent a lot of time putting the recordings together and everything. So definitely give that a listen if you haven't yet. I think it's like one of the best things I've done in recent years. So let's get to some questions. Okay. How do you choose the bowings for the suites? Anna Magdalena is impossible to understand. So yes, that was the manuscript I was looking at before. It is very hard to see. If you're overwhelmed at choosing bowings in general, I definitely recommend just getting the Baron Writer edition that has bowings printed, because they make very good decisions and a lot of those bowings are very similar to the ones that I do myself. So if you go to buy a Baron Writer edition, just know there's 2 choices. There's one in the like $25-ish range, and then one that's like $50 to $75. And the expensive one is the one that comes with all the different manuscripts, and the cheaper one is the one that just has bowings in there. So I recommend that one if you don't want to make your own decisions. But just sitting down with Anna Magdalena and just like thinking about it, I mean, it's definitely a more scholarly pursuit. I don't think that every cellist needs to go through and do bowings that way. And your teacher's probably going to give you bowings anyway if you're studying. So you don't have to go that hardcore. It's more for the historian types that want to do that. So just starting with Baron Writer is the best way, I think. How a tempo must Bach be played? I think just asking any tempo with Baroque music, they were not particular the way they eventually became more closer to the late classical and romantic era. Composers started being a lot more deliberate about what they wanted their tempos to be, and then eventually we started seeing actual metronome markings. But we didn't have that kind of like specific detail during the Baroque period, so there is a wide range that we can do for tempos. And people will argue over which tempos are appropriate, but there really is no absolute. Just like bowings and Bach, we do not have a final answer. So don't let people bully you into saying you're doing the wrong tempo of a Baroque piece. But what I will say is that more romantic and modern interpretations of Baroque music tend to play the slow movements too slow. Everything in Baroque music is about harmonic motion. So if we're doing a slow movement and we're going really slow and the chord changes are taking forever to get to the next harmony, that is not really stylistically appropriate, because we always needed some feeling of the harmony changing. Even if it was a slow, moderate pace, the harmony change is what's driving the piece. The pieces were not melodically driven in the Baroque period, so we really can't stretch out slow movements the way we do for later, more romantic repertoire. So I will say slow movements should actually be a little faster than we're used to, typically. That's just a general rule. And then in terms of fast movements, it really varies. The best way to really really, really know Baroque tempos is to study Baroque dance, because everything was informed by dance during the Baroque period. Dancing was a part of the culture just as much as music was. It was one of the few ways that they got to get out of the house and socialize. And every movement in a Bach suite, other than the prelude, is a type of dance that had an actual step. And when I was doing my master's, we had to read, I was so bad because I'm also just very clumsy in general. But we had to read historical dance charts and learn the dances to a minuet or a courant or a sarabande. We had to actually learn those to help inform us of how we were going to do our tempos. And honestly, it was really hard for me and really confusing, but that's really the ultimate way to understand a tempo, is understand the dance, at least for Baroque music. But if you don't want to do that, following the harmonic motion is a great way to start, because the harmonic motion is what's driving the dance steps. Yeah, okay, percussionist who just asked a question. Yep, I basically just answered that. But at least for percussion, so I assume you're doing it on like a marimba or something, you don't have that issue of like crazy sustain. I think that people who play sustained instruments go way off the deep end sometimes with sarabands, because they're able to just hold out a note for a long time, and so they ride on that to do a slow tempo, whereas normally, realistically, you're not going to be super sustaining, but you don't really have that problem as much. Best tips for performing Bach chamber music, and I don't know which chamber music she's asking about, but there's plenty of it. I mean, pretty much all Bach, other than the like big works, is chamber music. Anything with Bach, know the bass line. Like, all Baroque music, but Bach especially, was written bottom up, so from the bass line first, because the bass line is the basso continuo, it is the foundation of the music, it's the harmony and the chord changes. So knowing that and having an understanding of that will absolutely inform everything else going on. It'll let you know when there's actually a dissonance if you're playing the violin part, you'll understand when there's a dissonance because you know what's going on in the bass. So you can never go wrong with Bach studying the continuo or the bass line part. That is the most important. And I think that applies to all Baroque repertoire, but to Bach especially. Any favorite piece of Bach? No, I'm not good with favorites. I don't like to choose them. I go through phases sometimes where I really like one thing for a little while, but I never have like a long-term favorite. If I had to choose a favorite Bach suite, I would say the fourth in E flat. It's probably the least played, which is probably why I like it, because it doesn't get overplayed as much. But I also love the key of E flat. I just love the timbre and the sound and the darkness of it. So I would say my favorite suite is probably the fourth. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you so much for tuning in or watching afterwards. Be sure to subscribe if you're not already subscribed. I do still have a Patreon that supports my YouTube channel, which I'm so thankful for my patrons who are still supporting these live streams and make it possible for me to do this. If you did enjoy the stream and you want to give a tip or donation, you can see the link down there below. There's also super chats, but I have the GoFundMe set up for donations for the live streams. If you feel so inclined, it would be appreciated, but of course no pressure. I do this for free for everybody to enjoy regardless. And anything else? Play some Bach today, listen to some Bach, send him some love because he didn't have a lot of love during his years on Earth. But of course he lives on now, we all love him so much. So I think he's feeling that extra on his birthday today, or maybe his birthday is the 31st, but most people are celebrating his birthday today. Sorry, Antonio, we're just wrapping up the stream, but give it, 30 minutes or so, and then this stream is going to be archived, so you can go back and watch. I started with a little bit of the prelude, and I did play a bunch in this stream, so definitely go back and watch the archive if you just tuned in late, and check the whole intro on Bach. We talked a little bit about that and about ornamentation in general. So thank you guys so much. Oh yeah, I gotta get up and go walk over to the computer to turn the stream off. So thanks, guys. Happy Bach's birthday, and I will see you whenever I do another live stream. So thanks for watching. Where do I turn this off? Just kidding, I found it. All right, bye, guys.